Board. Welcome, Brian Stewart.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think a lot of you may know this material already, but this is a presentation that we use for various purposes, educating legislators and just the general public about the dangers of leaf blowers and the great alternatives that are out there. So I think what we like to start from this standpoint that everyone, regardless of where they're coming from in terms of tools, likes the idea of safe outdoor spaces. But most people don't realize that gas-powered leaf blowers are not just annoying, they're actually extremely hazardous for these three reasons. It's about the noise they create, their toxic emissions, and then the environmental hazards, both toxic waste as well as airborne hazards. And then, of course, battery electric alternatives are a lot better. And there's also other alternatives like leaving the leaves and raking, of course, but we typically make the comparison to battery alternatives because from a lot of people, they're saying, well, I have this tool, so what are you going to give me to replace it with? On the noise front, again, all of us are familiar how annoying these things are, but it's important to understand that these devices can cause permanent hearing loss, particularly for operators, but anyone who's nearby can also suffer from hearing loss issues. They've been linked to issues around strokes and heart-related conditions because of their loud noise. And they've been linked to early childhood learning problems. And of course, all of us who've been at home during the pandemic and hearing them while we're trying to have meetings, et cetera, can attest to the productivity problems associated with these loud noises. The kind of community of hearing-related experts use this scale here to describe noise, going from faint noise to really extremely loud noise. And they use the decibel, the dBA scale, and basically going from 60 to 70, for example, essentially doubles the loudness, the perceived loudness of the noise. So this isn't a linear scale, it's a logarithmic scale. So every 10 dB is a doubling. So you can see that right around 70 dB noise gets dangerous. By the way, I was just measuring the noise on an airplane flight recently, and it's typically well above 80. So you might want to check into some noise canceling headphones if you're traveling by air. But when the Portland Noise Ordinance was established a few years ago around leaf blowers, and they said in that ordinance that between March and the end of October, leaf blowers had to be under 65 dBA, and they published a list of devices that achieved that. And they provided an exception for those wet leaf months from beginning of October to the end of February, where they could go to as high as 70 dBA. But if you look at the gas backpack leaf blowers, which are the ones that the contractors use, I mean, for us homeowners, it's a different situation. It's easier to stay under that threshold. But for a backpack leaf blower, which are the ones you hear when your contractor or somebody, your neighbor's contractor is nearby, or if you're in a public park, these devices are typically well over the thresholds that are allowed, even for the winter use. And you can see there's really only 3 backpack leaf blowers that comply even with the winter use. And I've seen just from observation that these are typically not the ones that are used. These are typically the ones that are used because of the outrageous power that they produce, but also the extreme noise. Electric backpack leaf blowers, by the way, all comply with the year-round ordinance. So you can see that even from the absolute sound level standpoint, they're a lot quieter, but anyone who's been around these also appreciates the fact that the type of noise that electric blower makes is way different than the type of noise that a gas backpack leaf blower makes. It's a higher pitch, which means it doesn't penetrate windows and walls as easily. And that's why you can hear a gas leaf blower from blocks away, but an electric leaf blower, you will not hear more than 50 or 100 feet away typically. So that just shows that the battery powered leaf blowers are better from a sound standpoint. A lot of people have heard this soundbite that operating a gas leaf blower is equivalent to about 1,100 miles of driving a car. This is data from the California Air Resources Board. So basically, these devices produce hundreds of times more emissions than automobiles. And just having typically if you're in a neighborhood where contractors come in, clean up someone's yard, and then leave, they're there for about a half an hour. That amount of work with a contractor is about the same as having your car idling in your driveway for 10 hours, which most people wouldn't even contemplate doing. But that's the same kind of impact from air pollution. And the other thing that we've learned from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, that on a typical summer day, we're seeing something like 80,000 pounds of smog-forming pollutants that are produced by lawn and garden equipment. So it's not an insignificant amount of pollution. In fact, the California estimates that small devices like these have already overtaken cars in terms of their contribution to smog-forming pollution. This was another famous study that was done at a really high-tech automotive research center in California, comparing the Ford Raptor to a gas leaf blower. And you can see that for these, what's called criteria pollutants that the EPA tracks for smog, the gas-powered leaf blower was as much as 300 times more in some of these pollutants. But either way, you see that the gas leaf blower, these two-stroke engines, produce way more emissions. And that's because they just do not have the same kind of emissions controls that automobiles have. They don't burn fuel as efficiently and as completely, and produce all these horrible byproducts. It's also important to realize that beyond these criteria pollutants that we just discussed, there's also pollutants that come from burning operating these devices, burning gasoline, like benzene, butadiene, formaldehyde, and fine particulates, which have high correlation to cancer, respiratory, cardiovascular, and neurological diseases. So you do not want to be nearby one of these things. If you can smell it, basically you're being poisoned. So I would advise not getting near these. And of course, think of the operators who are using these things every day. It's a travesty, really, that we have strapped these devices to people who oftentimes don't even have good health insurance, but part of their livelihood is breathing this air all day long. It's really not a good situation. And battery-powered devices produce zero of these pollutants. So we've discussed these health hazards, but it spans from these particulates, which have a high incidence of disease correlation, heart disease, cancer, and lung-related and respiratory disease-related issues with these devices. And you can find quotes from pretty much every health agency in the world about how bad these things are for us. The other thing that a lot of people don't think about is the other environmental hazards. So there's about over $1 billion gallons of gasoline every year that's used for lawn and garden equipment. And as anyone who's used one of these devices, you'll know that a lot of that ends up on the ground, because spilling gas and oil as you're filling these is not unusual. And then also there's all this toxic waste to landfill, because there's the air filters that have to get replaced every year, the fuel filters, the oil cans. Every time you fill up a two-stroke engine, you got to pour oil in it. And so that comes with a little toxic oil-filled plastic container that ends up going to landfill. So that's millions of pounds cumulatively of toxic waste every year because of these devices. And then from a carbon standpoint, these leaf blowers will be far down the list compared to automobiles and your furnace and your water heater in terms of contributions to global warming. But a device that's used consistently, like a contractor's gas-powered backpack leaf blower, is going to produce about the same carbon emissions as an automobile over the course of a year, because it's used for many hours a day. So when you compare these things from a cost standpoint, this is the other thing that people often are curious about, and it's important to understand the mechanics of transitioning from gas to electric. There's a lot of advantages. Like on the first part here, fuel costs are dramatically less because electricity is so much cheaper than gasoline, and the efficiency of these devices in terms of converting the energy from electricity to the power that you want is really high. So it's something like 30 times less in terms of the fuel cost to operate these devices. So when you add that up over the course of a year and you consider the maintenance costs that are typically required with gas devices and not with battery powered devices, you can see that it's thousands of dollars of difference. But you have to buy, if you are using this device for many hours a day, you are going to need lots of batteries. And so, but even when you include the batteries that are required, which is, it's equivalent, I like to tell people, if you're a contractor, you need to think about buying a year's worth of fuel up front. That's what you're doing when you buy these batteries. So this $2,000 worth of batteries, that's kind of like buying 1 year of fuel. But over 2 years, you can see that the costs are dramatically less to operate and own, and even including the battery costs. So cheaper to operate. They provide zero toxic waste, solid waste. They don't need maintenance. They're plenty powerful to do the job. I mean, I think this is something that we hear a lot about. Are they as powerful as the most powerful gas backpack blowers? No. The question is not, are they as powerful as these horrible machines that are killing the operators? The question is, are they powerful enough to do the work? And the answer is absolutely yes. You might have to work a little bit differently. That's a whole nother conversation, but it's definitely possible to do, and it's been proved in many places. They're far quieter, they're cheaper to operate, and of course, they're ubiquitous in terms of being available. So thank you for listening. That's our little story. We have this presentation online if you want to borrow it and use it yourself. We're happy for you to get the word out. Thank you.